The tool is set up, and this is from the 2009 guidelines of performance benchmarks, and it's evolved a little bit since then, but some of this is still the same. It's a 250-point scale, and there are some prerequisites, which you'll see, and then some optional credits, and you have to get an aggregation of credits to add up to a certain minimal number. 40% or 100 points gets you the certified, and then there are 3 levels, and again, this is modeled similarly to LEED. In fact, now, the first version was stars, probably being from, since the home base is at Wildflower Center in Austin, Texas. But it's going to go to the gold, platinum, the same as LEED with version 2, but the same idea. Each credit has a wealth of resources and information within each one. It lists what the intent of that credit is, what the requirements are to achieve that credit, what you need to do to demonstrate you've achieved that credit by virtue of what documentation you need to submit, a growing list of potential technologies and strategies. And one of the primary purposes of this is to become a growing clearinghouse of sustainable site strategies, techniques, materials, and so forth. And so each credit has links or lists of those resources, and then there's more that's been compiled, which I'll show you in a minute. Also links to other credits, and there's lots of synergy and relationships between the different elements that credits are built around. And so having an awareness of that level of integration is also a strong intent of this. And then lists of other resources. So it's very much meant to be a tool, and these are all things that have evolved out of the process of developing it. So now this is, which is a slight refinement from the 2009 version, but version 2 still has these different categories of credits, and it includes some of the design elements that you would imagine, but also some other things. So first it starts with site context, and like it's basically similar to some of the sustainable sites credits in LEED. Basically what you propose to do where has an impact on how well that will achieve this idea of ecosystem service maintenance or improvement. And so site context is the first area. The second is your design process, and actually before starting to design, to understand the place that you are designing. And so there are some prerequisites and credits associated with pre-design assessment. A site assessment is a requirement, it's a prerequisite, as well as an integrated design process, meaning that you have all of the disciplines on board at the outset of the project to fully address all of the elements that are being conceived. And this is in sharp contrast to what has been historically more of a typical linear process, where there is one professional that starts, whether it's an architect or an engineer. Usually it's not a landscape architect, and then once it gets through a certain level of design, then it's passed on to other engineers, and oftentimes the landscape architect is the last part of that process to do planting design or other exterior features after most of the opportunities to actually achieve these ecosystem services have already been taken away by virtue of the things that the other professionals have done, unaware of that broader perspective. So this integrated design process is really an essential element, and why it is also a prerequisite. So that's under pre-design assessment and planning. Also under that planning process is an inclusionary process. It depends on what site is being developed. If it is for a school or for a park, the degree to which the community and stakeholders or participants or those who will actually use that place are involved in the design process is a big part of how well it serves that purpose. And so that is another, actually that one is one of the credits. And then there are 4 sections on site design, and this has been broken into four general areas in part to help understand those different areas, in part because were different groups of professionals coming together to work on those elements, and with a lot of cross-pollination in between them over time. So 4 elements of site design are water, soils and vegetation, and obviously a close relationship between all of these things, but between soils and vegetation, materials, and then a 4th category sort of evolved after the first 3 were set, and that is human health and well-being, and so a strong emphasis on the design, site design is metrics around human health and well-being being designed into that space. And then there are 4 other sections or categories. Construction, basically the construction process, how that is done, and there are metrics around that that must be met and demonstrated. And then another extreme, well, they're all critical, but another extremely critical one that oftentimes is not adequately addressed in the design process is operations and maintenance and long-term management of sites. And so one of the prerequisites under this category is that a maintenance and operations plan be developed in concert with the design, not something that happens afterwards. So if you're making the design intent to have a rain garden or green roof or some other type of landscape element, whatever that is, that needs to be done with an awareness of what the long-term implications of that system would be, so that it is maintained and operated in a way that provides those ecosystem services in perpetuity. And so an operations and maintenance plan is the way to at least make that a possibility. And then there are some other things that fall under that category, including the type of maintenance operations. And there are credits associated with, for example, using renewable energy in maintenance, and the kinds of materials that are used and equipment that's used in maintenance and operations of sites. And then Section 9 is education and monitoring, performance monitoring. And so one of the very important outcomes of this, as I mentioned, is a growing body of knowledge around the relationship between certain practices and the ecosystem services, the level to which we can achieve those functions and values. And so setting up what the intent is and then measuring against that intent and reporting back is something that there's a lot of incentive in some of the credits to do, because that will help us to get continually better at calibrating these different strategies and technologies to each place that we are, and knowing that what is going to work in a certain humidity and climate in New Mexico is going to work differently in Chicago or Anchorage or some other place. So that falls under Section 9 is the monitoring, and also education and using the design process as well as things that are available, visible on sites to promote this idea of sustainability or sustainable site attitudes, and to make make what's being done at that site visible and accessible to those who to come there, whether they live there or work there or learn. And then Section 10 was one that was added with version 2, and that is some additional incentive around achieving the highest level of performance, and it's kind of like some of the credits that you can get with LEED, which is achieving even higher than the highest threshold as spelled out in that credit in certain categories. And so being innovative, innovation credits are what they are called in LEED. So innovation and exemplary performance is another place. And one of the things that you'll see, or at least learn as you get more into this tool, is that there are some credits that are not achievable only because that condition doesn't exist on a site. So, for example, there is a credit associated with enhancement of a certain kind of a good example are credits for brownfield redevelopment. Well, if you don't have a brownfield site, you're not going to get those credits. Well, you could be at the best possible ecosystem service range and still not get, in early versions, not even achieve the highest rating on this system. But through exemplary performance and innovation, it now opens the door for the highest threshold. And that was that was in response to some of the comments that we heard with the 2009 version and through the pilot project stage. So that's sort of an overview of the components of the system, of the tool.